Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the very first edition of IndyStudio with me, Gordon Ross. Those of you who watch IndyCar regularly will probably recognise me from my sweaters, which I'm famous for, and I'm wearing the sweater that most people recognise me from. So this is the first in a series, I hope, of evening shows where we'll look at topical news items to do with Scotland, and also having guest interviewees as well. During the show, we'll also have a video feed from France from Dr. Mark McNaught, who's a assistant professor of political science, and he'll be letting us know what the current situation is in Europe towards Brexit, and how Europeans and how the French in particular view Scotland and its continuing struggles to become independent. However, before I go on to interview my guest, I'll introduce him just shortly. The first thing I wanted to talk about this evening is another news item. You may be aware that yesterday was the meeting of the Scottish Affairs Committee. Now, the Scottish Affairs Committee is a committee of Westminster government. It meets in various places throughout the year, sometimes it moves around Scotland. And yesterday's committee meeting was almost unique because only one party turned up for the meeting. I wonder if you can guess which party it was that turned up. Well, yes, it was the SNP. All of the British parties were absent. Something like 8 MPs in total, might even have been 9, I believe. Every single British party that was supposed to be there to represent the interests of their Scottish constituents failed to turn up. Now this, I think, points to a serial disregard for Scottish matters from the UK parties. And I think also it shows just how little regard they hold us all in, that they wouldn't even bother to turn up for the one committee in Westminster which deals with Scottish matters. Now also in the news this week we had the Scottish budget finally voted through. And after months of the Tory party telling Scotland that if they didn't like the settlement from Westminster, they should start using their tax-raising powers and raise some taxes to compensate for the loss of these funds due to Tory cuts. And so what do the SNP do? They do exactly that. They start to tax the rich a little bit more. 1 penny on income tax for the richest members of Scottish society. Now you'd think that would be wonderful, and it was greeted and welcomed by almost everybody in the country, except the people who told the SNP that they should be doing it, which was, of course, the Conservative Party, who complained bitterly that this was, as they put it, taxing the wealth creators and taxing wealth creation out of the Scottish economy. But bear in mind that the amount of money that is being raised by this is the equivalent to £1.30 a day for the wealthiest individuals in Scotland, people earning over £75,000 a year. Now, if they're moaning about a cup of coffee a day as being the increase in their taxation, I think they've got a cheek. So anyway, I think it's important that we realise that when we're talking about Scottish parties, the SNP is the only truly Scottish party. The others are all pretending. They add Scottish to the title. They are not Scottish. The UK parties have shown time upon number that A, they do not respect the Scottish Parliament. It was set up by them to make sure that the desire for Scottish independence was wiped out. They thought it would stop the independence campaign in its tracks. They were wrong. The SNP has been in power now for 10 years, going into their 3rd term. They may not be a majority government anymore, but they confounded the system designed to contain them. And I think Scots have actually confounded the system as well by voting for them. So I think it's coming to the point now where we have to start defending our Parliament. It's important to most people in Scotland. And as you're probably aware, there is an event planned for the 23rd of March this year called HOOP, which stands for Hands Off Our Parliament. I'll be there along with a very large number of other people who volunteered to go along to protect the Parliament. There is going to be a symbolic shield wall erected around Holyrood, in which 100 saltire shields have been specially created for the event. There will also be a children's shield wall, and each of the children will have a little tiny shield, the same as the adults, but just shrunk down a little bit. There will be face painting. There will be other activities throughout the day. So it goes on from 10 o'clock in the morning outside Holyrood all the way through until 5 p.m. We're hoping that we can also encourage MSPs to come out and join in with the proceedings. So we're there really just to show, particularly the Tories, that we take it very seriously, that we're going to protect this Parliament at all costs. Now that's the end of the news items for the moment. I'd like to now introduce to you Dr. Mark McNaught, who is an assistant professor of political science at a university in France, and Mark has very kindly provided us with a video of the latest news from Europe about Brexit and about how the Europeans, and particularly the French, are responding to the way things are going with Brexit. Kevin, if you're in the control box, can you cue up the video, please, for Mark McNaught? Okay. And hopefully we should see that in a moment, folks.
University of Rennes.
Oh, I've just been...
Okay, good evening. This is Mark McNaught for the first episode of IndyStudio, doing my report here from sister Celtic country, Brittany, here in Rennes. So I wanted to do just a bit of a couple of reports on different topical issues related to independence. First of all, I wanted to give an update on the Catalan situation, which is increasingly repressive on the part of the Spanish state. As you're probably aware, Carles Puigdemont is still in exile in Brussels, and they are trying to find a way to invest him as president by basically at a distance while he's still in Brussels. And it is looking increasingly difficult to do that in a legal fashion. So hopefully we'll see maybe this week what the plans are. Also, another ex-deputy from the coup who has been summoned before the Supreme Court today is now seeking asylum in Geneva. And it looks as if the Spanish authorities will set out maybe a Euro order for her detention in Geneva. And so that's another challenge for both the Spanish state and the Catalan authorities. Several people went before the court today, this week. Among them Artur Mas and others. None of them were imprisoned. However, Marta Rovira, I believe, who was one of the top members of the Esquerra Republicana, was let off on 60,000 euros bail, if I'm not mistaken. So the court, the judicial persecution of the Catalan leaders has intensified. Also, last week, Carles Puigdemont, who was the head leader of the Transition Commission, also went before the judge, in addition, a man named Santiago Vidal, who had the temerity to write a Catalan constitution, also went before the justice system in last week. So we see that again that there has not been any additional imprisonments yet. We still have the four: Jordi Sanchez, Jordi Cuixart, and then Oriol Junqueras, the vice president, and also Joaquim Forn, who is the interior minister in the Catalan government, who are still in jail and not let out without bail, pending further judicial proceedings, and they face perhaps 30 years in prison, potentially 30 years in prison for sedition and rebellion, which by law necessarily require violence. Okay, so but we hopefully within the next week or so we will see hopefully the Catalan government formed, and they can get on with building the Catalan Republic. Gordon also asked me to say a little bit about Europe and the possible the reaction of the Europeans to Scottish independence were it to occur, particularly before Brexit. And I really sincerely believe that there's a lot of goodwill for the Scottish position and the Scots on behalf of the Europeans. There have been much contact between Nicola Sturgeon and the European Commission and others. There is also, you have the Irish, who are very interested in who have been cooperating with the Scottish government as well. And while they cannot say anything openly, because of course the United Kingdom is the only interlocuteur with the European Commission over withdrawal, there's no question that there is a lot of sympathy for the Scottish cause, and it's a question of what occurs. I think in the next couple of months is going to be absolutely crucial to this situation, because they have to deal with the Irish situation, and also Barnier has said that a transition period is not a given, and that the UK government has to abide by its commitments in order to get that. And you also have the hard Brexiteers. And there was a letter sent to Theresa May, basically calling for a hard Brexit, and so again, the transition is not at all assured. So I think that makes it imperative that there be an independence referendum, probably by September or October at the latest, because it needs to be done, and Scotland needs to decide whether it wants to stay in the UK and crash out of the EU, or if they want to choose a better path for independence. And I have no doubt. I mean, these things can't be affirmed categorically, but I have no doubt that the European Union will give Scotland the space that if they did vote for independence within before Brexit, before next March, that March of next year, of course, that the Europeans would at the very least allow Scotland to remain in the customs union and the free market, carrying on with the trading, as disruptive as it may be, especially if England crashes out, and that they would. I would say that they would allow, again, Scotland the space to become independent, and then make a decision for themselves whether they wanted to be a full member of the European Union or an EFTA situation, and then there could be a real debate in Scotland, given the pros and cons of being in the EFTA or being in the EU, and have each make their case, and be honest about what the drawbacks and the advantages for each would be. So again, this is purely speculative, but I think that with the Europeans, there's a great deal of sympathy, and that if Scotland were to vote for independence this year, that they would again give Scotland the space to stay within the single market and customs union and carry on trading before, provided of course we live under we respect the four freedoms and abide by ECJ law. Finally, I just wanted to give talk a little bit about Brittany, where I live, and it's been very interesting developments within here, because in the wake of what has happened in Corsica, it's difficult to explain. It's complicated to explain, and I don't understand it fully. But Corsica has merged their regional and departmental chambers into one authority, and they have in this December they elected a full Corsican nationalist majority. And of course, Corsica is part of France. It has a separate language, and they want to guard their guard their languages. They want to make Corsican a co-official language, which of course the French are very uptight about. And in the wake, the leader of the regional council here in Brittany has called on for looking into greater autonomy, in addition to reuniting with the Loire-Atlantique. That's the department where Nantes is in it, which Nantes has been historically part of Brittany, but during the Second World War, what is now called the Loire-Atlantique, the department south of Ille-et-Vilaine, where I am, was lopped off under the Pétain regime. Anyway, so there's just a bit of news, and so we'll be seeing in the future what that holds. But good night, and I'll be back with another installment next week. Hi. I will. I'll go.
this was recorded.
I think I may have to wait for the cue.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mark, for your report this week. Unfortunately, we can't speak to Mark because he recorded his piece to camera earlier on today. But now we come to the main part of tonight's show. My guest this evening is Mr. Chris O'Kane, who is a member of the Society for Planetary SETI Research. So that's the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. Chris is an old friend of mine. We've known each other for a long time. And in the past, Chris and I have worked on projects to do with spaceflight and astronomy. I think it's safe to say that we know each other very well. But Chris has just finished a book on a subject which I'll allow him to describe, because it's a great mystery, a mystery which is based on Mars and on certain things which were found on Mars by various space probes which have visited the planet over the years. So Chris, I'll hand over to you in a moment. Hopefully we'll be able to pull up some pictures for you as well on the big screen here, on the display screen. Do you want to take it from here, Chris?
Thank you, Gordon.
Can you tell me what the project is about? I gather it's titled The Journey to Cydonia. Can you tell us, first of all, what Cydonia is?
The book is a story which I've been involved in for the past 25 years, and I'm the only person in Scotland to be involved in it. And it involves the investigation of anomalous features on Mars. You're probably all very familiar with the face on Mars, and that's been pretty much well covered, and it's become a sort of part of Mars folklore. But what's not really talked about is all the other anomalies 10 miles to the west of it, which have been thoroughly investigated by some very good scientists. The Society of Planetary SETI Research was set up by a group of American scientists to look into this very matter of finding artefacts within the solar system. Now, interestingly enough, we have this year the 50th anniversary of the Stanley Kubrick movie, 2001: A Space Odyssey, which deals with the business of finding an artefact, in this case on the moon, a black monolith. Now, what came out of the process of writing the book is that we discovered a very interesting politics. And what Kubrick had depicted in the film in 2001 is pretty much what's coming out. That we don't know if there is anything on Mars, but there's enough data and research to suggest there's something unusual. We think both the European Space Agency and the American Space Agency know this. There have been a number of papers published, and they're available on the SPSR website. If you look for SPSR SETI, Google that, you'll come up with the Society for Planetary SETI. And all those peer-reviewed papers are up there. You can download them as PDFs. It's all pretty good science. Now, what's this got to do with me? What's it got to do with Scotland? And what's it got to do with Glasgow? Now, if I can get some pictures up here, we can find out. Okay. Let's get back to I can't get number 1 up, which is the cover of the book. This is the anomaly field, what we call the anomaly field. Up there in the top right corner, you've got the famous face, of course, and then 10 miles to the west of that, you've got these pyramidal type forms, and especially what I want to do is draw your attention to little bright mounds in the middle of them, just amidst these larger hills. Now, what's Scotland and Glasgow got to do with it? Well, the bottom line is this. I was one of the first people to set up research in Europe to look into this stuff way back in the early 90s. And we had to get data tapes from NASA. And we had to get some computing equipment. With the help of friends in Cambridge and Glasgow University, we set up a project to start looking at some of these images that the Americans were looking at. And that took off, and I took the results back to America, and I spoke to some of the scientists there, and they were very keen to collaborate. They already had a project up and running called the Mars Project. So I suggested we set up the Mars Project UK. So when I came back to Scotland, I got in touch with a few people, and I found that there were a number of people interested in this subject. So we set something up based between Cambridge and Glasgow, and we started doing our own research. Pretty soon, CDs came out of all the Viking orbiter images of the surface of Mars. So we didn't have to continue working with tapes, so we started working with CDs. In the course of going through this stuff, I stumbled across a feature that the American scientists hadn't noticed.
Okay, what was the feature?
It's basically a pyramidal hill. For all the world, it looks like a pyramid.
Okay.
And it happens to be on the same line of latitude as a previously discovered 5-sided pyramidal hill. One they call the D&M pyramid off here to the right.
So this one here, yeah.
Yeah. And way over here on the left is what we call the NK pyramidal hill. There's the reason why it's called the NK, because I had a meeting with the scientists in San Francisco, and they wanted to name the hill after me. And I thought, well, I didn't really like that idea, so I don't want to claim it. As it turns out anyway, the International Astronomical Union will decide what features get named on Mars. And one of the priorities for naming features is, if you give a feature someone's name, that person must be dead.
So I'd have to kill you.
So I would rather be alive and kicking and in the game. So I said, look, I'll tell you what we'll do. At the time I worked for Strathclyde Regional Council, I worked in the education department, and I worked in a school up in the west end of Glasgow called North Kelvinside School. And I had suggested to the computing, head of computing, Mike Turner, at NK School, called NK because that's what everybody called it, not North Kelvinside, just NK.
A lot of people don't remember it now, I remember it.
Well, it was knocked down some years ago, and there's a story in that, so it's now flat, so it was demolished. So however, what we did was we got half a dozen or so students to join a process here with Dival, and that's a closer image of the plant. We got a group of students to spend their lunch times looking over this NASA data, and they looked at 20,000 square miles. They used NASA data, they used NASA software. The software was written by Ron Balk at JPL.
Is that the Jet Propulsion Laboratory?
The Jet Propulsion Lab in Pasadena. So it was all the jet stuff, and these young lads sat down and went through it in their lunchtime, and they published a report, and they sent it back to the American scientists who'd been working on the stuff. In the meantime, a friend of ours was setting up a conference at the Edinburgh Science Festival in 1996, and it was suggested that we take part in a heresies and archaeoastronomy conference. And basically, we got tagged on at the end.
Can you explain to us, Chris, what what did you call it?
Is this business of
archaeoastronomy?
It's a business of locating features on the ground on Earth in alignment with stars and other celestial.
So we're talking about things like Stonehenge or the
Stonehenge is a good
stones.
example. We talk about a solstice sunrise at Stonehenge.
Okay.
We look at all the other sites around Scotland, and if you look at the Ring of Brodgar up in Orkney, which we now suspect was a lunar observatory. Yeah. What we were getting at here was that archaeologists don't seem to take much account of the fact that ancient people could look at the sky. They were as capable as looking at the sky as we are, and they figured out how the sky worked. In fact, this is a big part of the archaeology of Europe. They think that the ideas for farming and agriculture came out of places like Anatolia, way off in the Far East there, and they made their way across the Mediterranean via Ireland and the rest of Britain and into Scotland, and they brought these astronomical ideas and farming ideas with them. So, unfortunate thing about archaeologists is that they think that these Bronze Age people were just too stupid to look at the sky. They couldn't figure this out. That couldn't work. Okay. And of course, the conference was there to prove that there was a long-established practice.
But this conference was dealing mostly with earthbound astroarchaeology.
Yes.
Or archaeastrology, however way around it is.
Well, where we were, since it was heresies, we were way out on the edge, because we were saying, look, we think we've found something with an archaeoastronomy connection on the planet Mars. The way I worked it was, as a marvellous friend of mine, Mike Malloy, used to say, you know, if you're ever going to a hotel to negotiate a deal for a science fiction convention, you should remember, one man's a lunatic, two's an organisation. What I meant by that is if a guy turns up in a Wookiee t-shirt and he wants to run a convention, he's not going to be taken seriously. Two guys in suits with a briefcase are going to get the business. So anyway, the idea was here, well, here we had a high school, here we had a group of high school students, and here we had NASA software, NASA data, and it was published, and it was presented to the public. No problem, you know, the anomalies are there, they're real. So, up to this point, NASA and ESA were having a very hard time with this. You know, they didn't really want to go down this road. They don't want to publicise this idea. They think it's all nonsense, and they think it's all been scrubbed.
Why, Chris, are they so resistant to researching these kinds of anomalies? Is it their careers they're worried about? Are they worried about their reputations?
I put it down this way: is you don't knock the paradigm that pays the rent.
Okay.
The paradigm is the belief that you follow, and if the belief is nobody's been in this solar system, nope, nobody can come here and build anything. Nope, there's no black monoliths here. That's it, you know, that pays the rent. It's okay to look for radio signals, but you can't look for artifacts.
And it seems to be okay to look for bugs or possibly small microbes, things like that, but not for signs of intelligent life.
It's what's called fringe science, Gordon, because it's not mainstream money-making science.
Yeah.
That's not the stuff that pays the rent.
Can I ask you a question, Chris? Because you mentioned at the beginning about the pyramidal shapes, but as I understand this, it's not the pyramids that are the artifacts here. It's not those that are the anomalies, are they?
Well, not entirely.
Right?
There's big ones and small ones, and let's go back to what we're really getting at here. These are, let's find...
The other thing I think might be worth mentioning here is that the pictures that you're seeing here, this is the original imagery from the 1970s.
They are 1976 Viking orbiter images.
Very grainy pictures, and they didn't come like this, did they? When you got them from
no,
the school?
They come as raw data
on tapes.
8-bit, 256 grayscale files, but they come as raw 8-bit files.
So we're talking pre-laser disc days.
Oh yeah,
magnetic
tape
and things like floppy disks. Yeah, not even floppy disks, was it? It was before that.
Not then. No, not then. They came in half-inch big reels. You know, like the old Man from Uncle.
So I was going to sort of try and set this in context, because this is before Macintosh computers, just about, isn't it? The Mac was just coming on the market.
Well, yeah, in this country, yes, Macs were just coming on. In fact, we had a project at the school where we tried to use some Mac computers to do a fancy process called fractal analysis, but they just weren't up to it. They just didn't have enough memory, and the business studies departments used Macs. But the science department used PCs and BBC micros and things.
The fractal analysis, as I understand it from reading your book, looks at the surface of the planet, and it looks at how rough the natural terrain is, doesn't it? And then it looks to see if there's anything in the natural terrain which looks like it isn't random. Is that right? It looks for patterns that shouldn't normally be there.
A fractal is a pattern of... a self-repeating pattern. A good example of a fractal is a tree.
Tree branches and roots,
trees branch out all over. If you look closer to the tree, you still get that branching pattern. And there's a very famous fractal geometry. It's a very simple equation. You keep feeding in the same image, previous image, and you get these marvellous fractal patterns back in. Now it turns out that natural landscapes that haven't been farmed, they have a fractal value. So they have an average fractal value because they're lumpy, bumpy.
They're unpredictable and chaotic.
They're randomly distributed, so they have a fractal value. Now anything within that landscape that has a fractal value out with the background value will pop up.
So it's going to stand out.
Now, it was initially used, it's used actually to look at blood cells for cancer. But also it's used for a military application that helps them find tanks and fortified locations in a natural landscape. It was actually used in the Gulf War to find scud.
I knew I'd heard about this before. I couldn't think about where I'd heard it.
So a very clever computer scientist and friend of mine, Mark Carlotto, who ran the fractal analysis program through some of these images, noticed that some of these anomalous features pop up as non-fractal.
So these are the little things that we are seeing with the designations.
Not the smaller objects, but the bigger ones. The bigger ones, yeah. So there's something numerically about them. As a friend of mine said, the computer doesn't know faces, it just knows numbers. And it knows that the numbers attributed to these features are different from the numbers around about it. And geologically, we can't think of a good reason for that. Because geology should act the same on all areas. You should have the same forces of wind or water or be sandblasted, or general erosion. These are the same.
Or the roughness of rocks being thrust upwards by
why you would get a
volcanism.
square shape in the middle of that, 2,000 square miles. This NK pyramidal hill is the only square feature, and everything else is kind of round and amorphous. We've got some blocky features here. So yeah, they do stand out as different in the first instance.
Okay.
But what scientists later got onto was these little bright mounds among the anomalies, which seem to be laid out in a pattern, a pattern of organisation, which don't fit the background again. But what they noticed was these little bright mounds, about 100 feet across, very, very reflective, and they're laid out in a series of triangles, isosceles triangles and right triangles, and they make up a very elegant but very complex geometry, which is very rich and very, very productive. And it's echoed in chemistry, and it's echoed in astrophysics, and it's part of a sort of cultural heritage that goes back thousands of years on Earth here. But
is it reflected in any Earth-like structures on Earth? Is there anything like this here on the surface of Earth? Or is it only on Mars that we're
well,
seeing
the only one always hesitates to say it, and I know that my friends in America don't want me to promote the idea of pyramids, but some of these small mounds, for lack of a better description, do look like pyramids.
Yeah.
So they don't fit. However, the interesting thing about the geometry, and there's been a lot done on this, if you look up the SPSR website, you'll find the papers that discuss the geometry in depth. And what you've got here is that these mounds, there's 14 of them, seem to be laid out in this pattern, which conform to a rectangular grid of a square root 2. A square root 2 rectangular grid. Now, that might not mean anything to you, but a square root 2 grid you'd probably be very familiar with, because hundreds of millions of people use it every day across Europe.
Piece of paper.
That's right. It's an A4 sheet of paper. Now in America they don't have this format. They use A4 because it's the most efficient use of paper. It's the least amount of waste. That's a square root 2 rectangle. 1.414 times the height. If that was 1 unit, that's 1.41 times. That's the aspect ratio of it. Now, if I fold that in half along the short slide, all right, I've still got a square root 2 rectangle. And if I fold it again, I've still got a square root 2 rectangle. If I fold it again, a square root 2 rectangle. If I double it, I've got a square root 2 rectangle. That's the only rectangle that has that geometric property.
So this pattern that we're seeing here, Chris, is a schematic of some of the anomalies laid out on this.
That's correct. They form this rectangular pattern. They conform to that grid.
What are the odds of this kind of pattern of objects just occurring randomly scattered on a planet's surface?
They ran a computer simulation looking at the random placement of 14 mounds, and the odds are over 2 million to 1 that this would just form naturally.
That's quite incredible.
So we have what we call a statistical anomaly. We've got geological anomalies. We've got fractal anomalies. And there's possibly other ways of looking at it. But what we've got in this whole area is something unusual. Now, at this point, we don't know what it is, but we're tentatively saying it's possibly evidence of intelligent activity.
So perhaps a previous civilization arose on Mars, maybe at a time when there was water on the surface.
I'm always reluctant to say the word civilization.
Well,
because
somebody intelligent enough to know this particular ratio.
Yeah. Well, it speaks to you. It does. In a sense, it's almost as if somebody would leave you a message. It's a bit like the black monolith. The black monolith is a specific shape and format. And this is the same thing. It's almost as if there's some intelligence here and it's speaking to you. If you understand this geometry, then you'll understand that this is intelligence. So there's a lot to go into, and my book goes into a lot of that. So it covers the years from 1988 up to 1996. just doing this research and the politics involved in it. We actually approached the European Space Agency with it, and they were very keen on the idea initially, and they included it in a report.
Is this for future missions?
Yes,
to investigate
we proposed a
anomalies?
future mission, and then we got some evidence that some of our American friends didn't like this.
You mean they took exception to you
Yeah,
proposing it?
somebody objected to this, Europe doing this. And we don't know the reason why, but it's a very interesting politics. However, it's still an ongoing case, and quite a few planetary scientists know about it, but there's not a lot of discussion about it.
At the moment, Chris, having read your book, and I know it kind of terminates after 1996, is that right? Mm-hmm. But I know for a fact that you've been continuing this research at a pace, and you're planning another book. Mm-hmm. What's the next step in this mystery, as far as you're concerned, research in Scotland? What do you think we need to do to find out what these anomalies are? How do we find out what they are?
Well, what you have to do is, it's actually fairly obvious. You've got to go dig them up.
You mean actually
you
get
need to
Mars?
find out what they are. You need to get down on the surface and get a close look. And if they're interesting enough, then you might have to dig them up.
Does that mean robot probes, or do we send people
initially,
to the surface?
Yeah. Initially, send robots. Look, don't touch. Just send a camera system to go visualise the area so we can get a good look at what's there.
I know recently inside the pyramids at Giza there was a robotic drone sent into the inside of a pyramid where they couldn't get into it, and they inflated a little, I think you know about this, don't you? This little inflatable airship drone was sent inside to look at where these passageways went because they couldn't disturb it. Are we talking about that level of technology but
Yes.
being sent to Mars?
Mm-hmm. That's the kind of thing you would probably have to do. I don't think they've sent the probe into the chamber in the Great Pyramid yet.
It's just a plan, is it? Just
but it's online to do it.
Do you think the technology, let's say, we have a satellite manufacturer here in Glasgow, in Maryhill, as you know, Clydespace, who, as I understand it, have just been bought over by a larger European firm. But they, if I remember correctly, manufacture CubeSats, which are sub-miniature satellites with very tiny, intricate circuitry crammed into them. Would they be the kind of people that we could go to say, look, we need a small probe to go to Mars, maybe a balloon or an airship type probe, like a drone, like a commercial drone, to go there and map this area and find out what these things are?
Well, it's interesting you say that, Gordon, because I'm working up a case and I'm trying to pitch the idea to Strathclyde University. Already had some initial discussions, and this would be a good project for Glasgow to do because there's lots of interesting historical connections to start with. When next year is the 100th anniversary of the R-34 airship crossing the Atlantic both ways. It was the first aircraft to do that, and it was built in Shannon in Glasgow. It turns out that they've got an aerospace materials research base down in Shannon.
This is the one which the First Minister was opening recently, the lightweight materials technology place.
Yes, so I mean the idea of designing something for this Mars mission using an airship type probe, because the Martian atmosphere is very thin, you can't use helicopters.
Can't fly in it, can you? The wings would have to be very large, or it would have to, as I understand it, have to fly very, very fast to stay up. So a balloon is really the only thing.
You really just want to drift over these things and around them and see what they are. Mm-hmm. Now that's Glasgow's well placed to do that. It's got the technology, it's got the expertise. It then needs the launch facilities, and of course it needs all the money to do it. My idea is that we basically start a Kickstarter fundraiser, and we try and go for bigger money. Now the cost of a mission could be anywhere from maybe 30 million to 200 million, depending on what you want to do. If you can team up with another space agency that has a probe going there, you might be able to piggyback with it.
Well, brings me to a question I wanted to ask you, Chris. Last week we saw Elon Musk, his company SpaceX, sending the first Falcon Heavy, the largest rocket on the planet at the moment, and firing a car on a trajectory out towards the orbit of Mars. Now, if Musk is capable of build a rocket that's capable of sending something that far, as cheaply as that with a reusable rocket, then could we piggyback a smaller payload in with maybe one of the bigger Mars probes that's already slated to go? Is that a possibility?
He does have smaller rockets that could do the job on their own, but certainly that's something that Musk and his team could do at SpaceX, because if you can launch a car out towards Mars, you can launch a little airship probe.
Yeah, we're talking something the size of this table, aren't we, really, in terms of size? So it's quite a small unit.
Getting the data back will be the problem, because Mars is a long way away. You know, 50, 60 million miles to transmit the information over, so you need a fairly powerful transmitter.
Are there not orbiting spacecraft there which are capable of sending such?
We've got a spacecraft from India, and we've got a spacecraft from several spacecraft from America, and we've got Mars Express from Europe.
All right.
So
there's a whole fleet of them.
Yeah, and the idea will possibly go through Mars Express. But you've got to get the data back. So that mission has to be designed and worked out. But I think we've got the resources, the know-how in Glasgow to do that.
There is some past history to this, Chris, because if I remember, was it Dr. Pillinger? Is that the name of the chap who crowdfunded a British probe to Mars called Beagle 2? Is it Colin Pillinger, I think his name was? He died just before.
Several times, he's a marvellous character.
But he proved that you could crowdfund a Mars probe.
Yeah.
He did it. He was the first person to do it. Do you think we could do something here in Scotland on that scale?
I think we could, definitely, if everybody else wanted to play ball.
If everybody wanted to chip in.
Yeah, if the Europeans said, okay, yeah, we'll go along with it. I think Colin Pillinger had a problem in that European Space Agency wouldn't switch on the transmitter. They wouldn't give him the transmitter between his Beagle probe and the Mars Express once he let it go. He didn't get 100% of what he wanted, and that's a problem with you on somebody else's mission. They can say, sorry, we need that resource for something else. So you've got to be able to fit in. You've got to be able to be a good partner.
So we need to buy a bit of bandwidth.
Exactly.
Okay. I have one last inquiry or question about this, and that was, I remember that the Beagle 2 spacecraft was assumed to have been lost when it detached from the spacecraft that was carrying it. But we now know that it actually made it down safely to the surface and actually opened and deployed, but it didn't switch itself on. And so, despite the fact that everybody assumed that this crowd-funded mission had actually failed, it didn't fail. It made it to the surface, but something went wrong with the probe on the surface. I'm thinking if something like this can be crowd-funded here in Scotland, then surely part of the fun of that would be people who buy into the programme maybe being able to watch on their computers or their phones the footage that's coming from the drone on the surface. Is that possible?
It is possible. It may even be possible to control all the transmission with a transmitter from the surface. And I'd be very interested to see schools getting involved. They set up dishes and receive the signals for themselves, because all they've got to do is point the dish at Mars.
Well, Chris, it's been a pleasure talking to you tonight, and I want to thank you for stepping in at such short notice as well. Good luck with the programme, and everyone a round of applause for Chris, please. Thank you. If anyone has any questions that they'd like to ask, there's maybe about 5 minutes left. I see a gentleman in the audience. Yes, sir.
Yes, a couple of things. I'm an amateur artist, and of course the ratio you're talking about is the very ratio that we use for paintings.
Right.
I think it's called the golden circle.
Ratio.
The golden ratio.
So I'm sitting here astonished when you were saying that. I thought, wait a minute, I know that ratio. And if you look at all the famous paintings, that is the canvas size. And as a former old geographer, what happened to ley lines? Did they die a death? Was there anything there?
Ley lines not taken seriously by science, mainstream science, but I know there's still lots of people who do the dowsers practice looking for ley lines, etc.
Maybe we should see what ley lines are to folk who don't know what they are.
All right, they seem to be possibly geomagnetic forces within the Earth that run in lines and in certain directions. It's still a matter of debate.
And they're identified by features from history.
Yeah, well, actually, I do know a friend who actually dowses for Wiltshire County Council.
But he's
When
looking
they're
for
going
water,
to build
is he?
something, they get this guy out to douse in case he finds any pipes or anything.
Water companies still use dowsers to this day, despite the fact they don't know how it works. They still use them. Have you any other questions?
Thank you.
Yep.
Oh, I've got a question here. Well, I've got two questions here from an audience member.
Okay.
Have there ever been any space probes returned from Mars to Earth?
No.
And the second question. Mars has got 2 moons. They're very small. But has there been detailed research into the 2 moons?
There has been, because the orbiters that are there have been taking a look at the moons now and again. They think they're captured asteroids from the asteroid belt, but they don't know.
There is, if I can correct one thing from your first question, there was something which
returned.
did make it from Mars to Earth, and it was a meteorite. They know it's from Mars because it contains a radioactive isotope that only occurs on Mars, and it contained what they thought looked like small fossilized microbes, something like single cell creatures. And then after they decided that that was the case, they decided then that they weren't after all. So the scientists are still...
They thought maybe it was bubbles.
The scientists thought it might be crystals, but there's still some
Put it
dispute
down to
over
chemical
it.
etching. I think it's just a process of chemicals,
Yeah.
but they do look very suspiciously like microfossils.
If Elon Musk and SpaceX have their way and build their colony on Mars, then there will be a regular traffic to and from the planet. Because the way the orbits work, you fly out to Mars, it takes 6 months, you have to live there for 2 years to wait for the planets to realign so that the next trip can come out and get you. But it works on a cyclic basis, so Mars is actually a place that you can commute to. But it's a very long commute, you need a book, right? Several library books probably to get you there.
Could you just add to that just slightly before the next question? Finding microbial life on Mars is a problem. In some ways, they want to find it, but they don't want to find it, because if they do find it, it means you can't go there.
Because
it's off limits.
We might be killed by the microbes.
You can't contaminate that environment. So there's pressure on them to find it, and there's pressure on them not to find it.
Is this one of the reasons why you think the probe that we should send should be an aerial probe rather than a lander?
Yes.
To stay off the surface?
Stay off the surface, because that's where all the dirt is, and that's where all the problems are. You want to be hovering above it.
Okay, here's an excellent question. We can maybe close on this one. Just over 2 years ago, the rocket base on South Uist launched the first and so far the only vehicle to get into space from the British Isles. Could Scotland become a centre of small-scale research?
Oh yeah, I think it could become a centre of big-scale research actually, because we've got the facilities now that you probably could build your own spaceport.
Relatively
we
simple.
could launch our own rocket systems. Yeah, we could certainly do low Earth orbit stuff.
Very easily.
And upper atmosphere research, we could do that, yes.
It was assumed for years that Scotland was no good for launching satellites because it's so far north. But the actual physics of it are interesting. You can send a spacecraft around the pole, over the poles, into what's known as a polar orbit, which are not as popular for things like weather satellites, but they're particularly useful for spy satellites and for monitoring the ice at the poles. So there will be a market, I think, for that.
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah.
Well, I think that's it for this evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us on the very first, and hopefully not the last edition of IndyStudio. Good night from me.